Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to this Vivid webinar on Don't Underestimate the Power of Good Apps. This session is looking at how to deliver high quality apps at speed and scale. So this session is being run by Vivid and with HPE. I'll flag it at this point, but we will talk about it. I will mention it again at the end of this webinar. We have a Post-Discover Summit for 2017. This is one of the presentations as part of that. Please have a look at the link and look at what else is going on. There are lots of very interesting events. So this particular session is brought to you by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And briefly introduce myself. So my name is Stefan Shibanovic. I'm your host for today's session. My background is as a software tester. And now I'm delivery director for Infuse Consulting, technical specialist company, particularly focused in on testing. And my particular interest in this talk is about how to build good apps so that I can enable better testing. My role within Vivid is as the UK Agile Chapter Lead, and I'm looking to organise some Agile-specific events shortly, and there's at least 2 Agile-speaking webinars coming up over the next year, so keep an eye out for them. And then moving swiftly on. So today's speaker is Toby Marsden. Toby is the Director of Business Development, Application Delivery Management Solutions and DevOps for HPE Software EMEA. He leads the Application Delivery Management and DevOps business for EMEA and has an extensive background in delivering solutions in project governance, planning, business process engineering, architecture, software config management and development, quality assurance, and application service management. He's helped many customers realize their ambitions to improve agility in their lifecycle process, reducing risk and standardized quality management processes, and remove imperfections in the quality process. So clearly somebody who's got a lot of experience here. So I'm really looking forward to this presentation. A couple of housekeeping points. This is a live session. It is being recorded, and recordings will be made available to all Vivid members, and the recordings are usually available within 24 hours of the event itself. Let's move on. So we now have, for people who have used to previous Vivid events, we've changed how we present this. So just bear in mind around the webinar control panel, we have multilingual support now. So by clicking the flag on the left-hand side, you can change your default language. So if you ask a question in your own language, it will automatically get translated, and we can then ask those out. So there will be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Please ask questions throughout it. We'll make sure that there is time at the end to ask them. And I invite you to sit back, enjoy, listen to Toby, ask questions as you go along, and we'll go on from there. So Toby, over to you.
Thanks, Stefan. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending on where you are in the world today. As Stefan said, my role in HPE software, HPE Enterprise software, is really looking at how do we help our customers be more effective and efficient in the modern age of delivering applications. So really going to talk to you today about what's happening in the market, and then focusing on a couple of solution areas that we're very keen to obviously work with our customers to kind of adopt and understand how that's going to be able to implement on top of the processes and practices they've already brought into their organizations today. So, first kind of scenario we've got to think about when we look at where we are in the market or as an IT organization is really what's happening in the world as we see it today. And it all focuses around this digitization dynamic where, you know, I started in IT probably 25 years ago. My first job was in a database company selling databases and helping customers implement databases. And the technology and architecture of IT at the time was pretty flat. It was pretty much centered around optimizing business process, helping people do their daily tasks internally much more effectively. And then as we grew through those eras of, you know, client-server computing, we started to embrace the web channel. We started to engage our customers into that IT architecture and be able to, you know, deliver our services out to the consumers more effectively. And where we are today, I think everybody knows, you know, we can see it in our daily lives, whether it be our smartphones or our tablets. You know, equally, you know, cars are getting smarter. You know, we were looking at the utilities market. We're starting to see smart meters coming in. And if you're based in the UK, there's a mandate for all utility providers to provide their consumers with smart meters by, I think it's 2020. You know, and equally, everything is changing to the dynamic of this kind of IoT digital world, where we're trying to use IT to help people's lives be more effective, but also to optimize and supply services to the right people. So as that, you know, that market, that whole digitization of the world happens, it creates a huge opportunity for IT to be both front and center in the business, you know, planning dynamics of most organizations, but also to provide value-added guidance and advice back to the business itself, where, you know, use cases might not have been thought about. The technology is changing so fast that we're seeing, you know, new types of architecture, new types of technology springing up in the matter of months, whereas in the past it could be the matter of years. So as this kind of digitization happens, we have to, you know, be flexible with the IT architecture we've got, be looking at the tools that we use to help us deliver that, but also the processes and the types, techniques that we're using to deliver those new functions and services back to the consumers. This slide kind of really tells it all from a business perspective. So if you look at, you know, someone that's not necessarily steeped in IT understanding, and it might be just a simple business person, and I think when Stefan said one of my first roles was starting out in the world of business process re-engineering, where I was helping insurance companies look at their current process architectures and say, well, where can we be more efficient? Well, when you look at the kind of a simple shopping process, it looks pretty standard. It looks pretty easy. You know, someone is using a device or an environment to help access a shopping site, an e-commerce site, and we do a number of different tasks from a process perspective. You know, we log in, we add items to a cart, we check out, we ensure the shipping is correct, whether it's, you know, how long we want it to be, but also where it's going to. And then we probably track that order and where the products are that we've ordered. And eventually it ends up in our hands, you know, either, you know, delivered to our door or, you know, in electronic fashions as well. And I know this process very well because I tend to have products and things arriving at my door via Amazon on a regular basis. I won't tell you where from, but my wife loves shopping on the internet. So effectively, when we look at that end-to-end process, and from a business person, it looks actually quite simple. It's not something that, you know, you really kind of get into the details of the architecture behind it. When you blow it out and you start to look at that architecture more from an IT perspective, it becomes incredibly complex. You know, from an integration point of view to all the different services and activities and the calls that those transactions are making across the architecture. You know, the customer login might hit a database. It might go for security validation. You know, then we're looking at going again into the cart, into the shopping cart scenario. It accesses some more services. You know, as we progress through that process chain, it may call out to external service providers. You know, and we might want to check credit ratings if we're looking to supply a loan against something that's very expensive, or, you know, to offer finance options. So as we drive this end-to-end process, the actual architecture of this environment becomes even more complex. And The reality of the world today, as we start to build into, containerization, microservices, etc., in the architecture, it's becoming even more increasingly complex. As part of our system architecture that is, very stable, very in the world that we've seen it as we've built it over the last 30 years of IT. There's part of the architecture that's becoming increasingly complex, increasingly continuously changing and moving forward. So we've got to start to work out how this end-to-end process affects the end user, because the reality of all of this internal application complexity is the end user doesn't care. The end user wants the service to work first time, otherwise they'll start to move elsewhere. And they'll start to look at other different options for buying. There is no, it's not like the old environments where you went to a bricks and mortar store and that when you were there, you wanted to buy something. Now there's so many options for customers to quickly flip from one service provider to a new service provider or one e-commerce website to a new e-commerce website. But we've got to be able to offer this exceptional customer service and user experience as we go. So when that happens and when we start to look at all of those things coming together, there's actually a number of different things that need to change. We don't just need to think about, the architecture and the complexity. We need to start thinking about multiple environments from our customers accessing that user service. In the past, it was probably a web browser. In the early days, it was probably very Microsoft World. That's obviously changed dramatically as the world's progressed, and we're seeing the rise of Safari and iOS environments. But equally, things like the Firefox browsers, etc., and the Chrome environments of Google. So we're sort of moving into this sort of multi-threaded world of application delivery from a front-end form factor. And as we progress into mobile, we're having to start to think about not only can we deploy that application onto a mobile environment in a HTML5 kind of environment, but also do we want to start isolating parts of that application functionality into smaller subsets that we can start providing in native mobile applications that become even more consumer friendly and usable. And then on the back end side of things, we've got to start thinking about the architecture. How do you plug together an old, what you could say is legacy architecture, and you could say everything from today that we've developed becomes legacy of the future, with all the new things that are happening in the technology types that are moving forward. And that becomes a very difficult world to manage and understand change and the impact of change, and equally the quality of the service across all those different environments. And then as you start to think about this from an IT innovation perspective and a business innovation perspective, we're having to start to think about how do we do this in agile fashion? How do we do this in such a way that the IT system, the way that we deliver the software, and we could call it a pipeline of software change, how do we optimize the threads? How do we optimize the flow? How do we make sure that we're focusing and prioritizing on the best business innovation items? How do we ensure that there are no bottlenecks in the end-to-end release cycles of that application functionality? And how do we start to automate some of the key day-to-day tasks that allow us to deliver this functionality to the business faster? But equally, as and when the business changes its mind, how do we understand the impact of that change? How do we understand what's affected that requirement's deprioritized and this new requirement becomes really important? So all of this new world of application delivery requires a huge amount of change for IT teams to think about. Not just the architecture and the plug and play ability of the application services, but also all of those different process streams, the way the tools interact, the way that we have to think about the use cases that we're testing against for all those different customers. So what we've started to think about from an HP perspective and in how do we need to sort of look at this problem and break it up into some areas of fundamental change that we can help our customers address. And we break it up into three main areas. We look at the speed aspect. So how can we optimize the flow of the work? How can we prioritize the right requirements? How can we trace the impact of those aspects so decision points are made instantaneously or almost in an automated fashion? How can we give visibility back to the end-to-end and scenarios? Quality, as I said already, it doesn't just start and stop with one use case, etc. We've got to think about quality shifting further left in the overall supply cycle of that application functionality. How do we start to think about what do we need to do before we actually do it? Rather than just think about we're going to get into the release cycles, I need to test. How do we bake that quality? How do we break the usability, the user experience right at the front end of the supply cycle of IT? And then obviously from a scale perspective, how do we manage all of this in a way that brings it all together? The architecture and the environment is uncontrollable now. In the past, we probably owned the data center and the only interface was from a client, a web browser. Now, we don't necessarily own the data center. We might be outsourcing to a cloud supplier. Equally, we don't own the clients in a lot of cases. It could be a customer's own personal mobile environment, a tablet or a smartphone, etc. So as we drive that dynamic, we've got to think about these three key aspects of what we do to help people deliver faster. And you break it up a little bit more into where we're heading from a portfolio perspective. What the way we look at these three main challenges, from a speed perspective, it's all about agile releases. So even if you're in a waterfall kind of project delivery cycle, how do we understand some of the agile practices and we bring that into that waterfall dynamic? And it may not be just to say, right, we're going to turn everything agile. And I've seen a lot of companies do this over the year where they said, right, we're agile now. And actually what they've done is they've become agile in the development cycle. Very, very good to get good business interaction and smaller iterations of software development. Actually drives quality up as well. But actually we've got to think about agility across the end-to-end piece. So you might think of it from an application lifecycle delivery perspective, all the way through from planning, designing, building, testing, releasing, and equally, how do you think about bringing operations into that as well? This is the whole DevOps cycle that we're seeing in the world today. Operations shouldn't just be waiting for things to come over the wall and run them. They should be part of that overall delivery stream. So we're starting to think about change boards and change requests being built into that delivery life cycle. So rather than have a lengthy process of reviewing what's happened at the end of the delivery path, start to think about that coming right to the front end of those delivery paths as well. Quality, as we talked about already, it's got to be superior in the modern world. You have to be able to drive a much more innovative use case, but you also have to make sure that use case of the service that you're delivering is exceptional. And it's really down to this competitive landscape we see. We did some research, there's lots of different stats on this as well, but an average user switches off after about a 3-second delay now. I remember all the way back to my early years. My first application packages was a mail system, which was on Lotus Notes, and I had access to Siebel. I used to get in the morning, I used to build a complex query in Siebel, I used to run it, I'd go and make a cup of coffee, 20 minutes later I'd come back to my desk and it was finished, and I was happy with that speed. Today, we don't want that speed. We are at the point now where we need instantaneous results from the IT systems we see. And if you think about the millennials coming out of college, they are expecting that type of world. They're not expecting the world we saw 20, 30 years ago in IT. And then obviously from a scale perspective, it's absolutely imperative that we start to look at how do we bring together this operational state of IT to remove some of these roadblocks. If you're a tester and you know that world, one of the major fundamental challenges of every customer I see is access to dev and test environments. Simply put, provisioning a dev and test environment with the right tools on it can take, in a lot of cases, 4 to 6 weeks for a lot of customers to get that environment. We can't have that level of a roadblock if we're going to be driving innovation streams at this speed. So we've got to start thinking about the scale of how we bring all this together. But equally, we've got to start thinking about how do we take some pressure points off that logjam and start to virtualize some of our testing architectures and our sort of the network architectures so we can effectively test earlier in the delivery lifecycle without having a real-life production environment to work on. And then the last piece on top is really about how you can then use the data in the system. So a lot of focus we've been driving over the last 4 or 5 years is really about how do you plug all of this together to get end-to-end traceability across the piece. So if you think about that change impact analysis stream, how do you understand if something changes in that overall end-to-end architecture that everybody knows what's changed, but equally you can make some very key decisions based on that change of what's happened, whether it's a line of code or a requirement or a defect's been fixed or a test has been run, and the results of that. You need to bring all that together. And once you bring all that data together and you sort of contain it in a system, you can start to use it for your benefit. You can start to see what happened and start to run some really intelligent algorithms on it. You can start to think, well, if I see a similar state passing through that change life cycle, what does it mean? Am I going to actually run into problems in the future? Or what do I need to do to ensure I hit the deadline date with the right levels of quality so I can roll out and the business is confident that it will work? And that's a lot of the things we're looking at from a predictive analytics perspective. And I'll talk a little bit more about the use cases later in the presentation. So, everyone kind of asks me when they join HP and, why HP and why are we in this market and what do our customers see? Well, we've done a lot of work, obviously, to innovate our portfolio, and we are kind of the market leaders in the quality management space. But don't take my word for it. This is some recent analyst reviews of where Hewlett-Packard Enterprise sits in terms of its capability and tooling. So I'm not going to read these out, but effectively, we've done a lot of work over the last few years to make sure we're not only helping to deliver customer value, but the analysts see us as leading the market and driving the market in strategic directions. And as you can see here, there's the report from the Forrester Wave around the mobile automation tools, the Gartner Magic Quadrant from a software test automation perspective, and again, the Forrester Wave from an application performance management perspective as well. And our performance management suite is obviously there's a lot of tools out there that help do monitoring, but there's not a huge amount of tools that help to bring the monitoring together with the QA procedures as well. So we can do pre and post performance management activity and help to shift monitoring left, but also help to reuse a lot of the assets that you use in the testing performance domain to move into the production monitoring domain as well. So I wanted to kind of focus the next part of the presentation on a couple of areas of the platform that we're kind of driving out. And I think these are two very important parts based on what I've said about the market and the conditions today. We're going to have a look around Mobile Center and how, from a mobile channel perspective, how you can start to embrace that new omni-channel dynamic without having to throw away everything you've started in your functional testing world or your performance testing dynamics. And equally, as you move into mobile, security becomes a massive part of that. We've always advocated at HP that there are 3 pillars to quality: functional performance and security. And we need to start thinking about, as QA organizations and software delivery organizations, how do we continue to embed quality in across all those form factors? And I'll talk a little bit more about Mobile Center and what we can do there. And then the second piece will be around the agile delivery, the DevOps delivery, and the analytics side of things. And we're going to look into our new products around ALM Octane, and then something that will be in the future roadmap, but I'll give you a quick preview of that as well in terms of what we're working on for our predictive analytics capabilities. So let's start off with the Mobile Center and the lifecycle. So it's the same dynamic from a mobile delivery perspective. You need to think about that end-to-end delivery chain and how we can bring that together. A lot of customers I've spoken to initially have outsourced their mobile development parameters, and they've actually outsourced the QA testing of that aspect to third-party companies as well. But as the mobile channel and the omni-channel, advances and increases in terms of the organization, I'm seeing a lot more people start to take this in-house as well, so start to control the governance and the quality of that whole mobile delivery aspect. And we really think of it as an end-to-end life cycle as we sell. It doesn't doesn't start and stop anywhere. We need to be able to plan, build, test, release, and run these applications in the same fashion that we've been doing before. And equally, we need to be making sure that any mobile application dynamic that is integrating with the back-end systems has very clear understanding of that integration, but also the security risks and everything else that goes on with it. So Mobile Center is our core platform to help bring this to the market. We've had it as a live GA product now for around about 2 years, and it's fully integrated into the existing ecosystem of what we can do, from an end-to-end security, testing, functional performance, and then monitoring perspective of the application. And it's all baked into the agile delivery tools and the lifecycle management tools and the QA management tools that we've had for a long time. But kind of dropping down a layer below this slide, I wanted to just talk about a few use cases around that Mobile Center dynamic. The first one's manual testing. So I think when you look at most people that start with a mobile focus, they start with, can I test some of the ideal, the standardized use cases that are repeatable? My test strategy is going to be mainly based on people, using that application and testing those scenarios as they move forward. And we've had a product in the market for many years called HPE Sprinter. I don't know if you've seen the Sprinter technology. If you haven't, it's something that's available to people as part of their QC and ALM licenses. But effectively, we've plugged this into Mobile Center. So what does Sprinter do? Sprinter allows you to interact with the application and do a number of really cool things. Every time you do you test something, or you actually touch the application, whether it be a web or a mobile application, it's capturing each step of what you're doing. So when you're kind of exploratory testing an application, Sprinter will be in the background recording the steps that you took. So if that exploratory test or that manual test that you ran that wasn't clearly documented from the outset becomes something that you think is actually repeatable and something that we should be running a long time, you've already got the test steps already built and already understandable. So you can package those up as a repeatable test case that then can either be automated or it can just be put into a manual test step in the next cycle. Equally, Sprinter allows people to kind of package up the defect aspect of what happened. So one of the big problems I see when you go from a raise a defect to get a developer to look at it is I couldn't recreate that on my environment. I didn't know what you did to get to the defect, therefore I don't know how to recreate it. And what Sprinter does is also understand exactly what's happened. It packages up and takes screenshots of what you did on the application. So when you send it back as an overall defect, you can package up all those items, give it to the developer, and then he can quickly understand what was done to try and recreate that same defect. And then obviously it will get down to the line of code that caused that problem, and they can fix it and they can test it again and put it through the cycle. So a really powerful tool to be able to help to drive that dynamic. And of course, if you connect this into Mobile Center, it's done on real devices, with multiple different versions of operating systems. So as you can see on the left of this slide in the Mobile Center diagram, there's multiple different devices with multiple different operating systems. And effectively, you can test this app on multiple different environments and see what's happening and capture it all with Sprinter. Next one's obviously taking that a level further. So, first and foremost is, we need to test, and not everything can be documented from a test case perspective. Well, you need to then start to think about how do I optimize and how do I automate. So as with anything else that we've done in the past, we've had obviously Quick Test Professional in the market for a long time. Unified Functional Testing is the superset of that and includes service testing and other tools that help you to drive this. We've integrated those tools back into Mobile Center as well. So you can obviously script, record, playback in that environment, but they also integrate into the CIs and the IDEs. So we've released recently a product called LeanFT, if you haven't not aware of it. A lot of the criticism in the past of our QTP and UFT frameworks was it all ran in its own environments, and you had to use the UFT scripting engine to get to build code, and not everybody liked it. So we've opened up that capability, and now you can run the same capabilities using LeanFT inside the IDE. So if you're building in Eclipse or IntelliJ, etc., you can write the scripts inside of those, and the technology will allow you to use the object runtime engines, etc., to help you to get to all of the things that you know well in UFT. So it becomes a very powerful tool to give to the developers, because obviously once they've scripted in that, it can be used in the regression cycles further down the line and run in the usual UFT kind of runtime engines that we have. And that all plugs into Mobile Center. Again, so this is not just, playing it back on a web browser, it's playing it back on a real device with a real operating system with the real applications on it. So hugely powerful technology to help people to kind of optimize the functional automated testing that they do on mobile devices. Another key factor of Mobile Center is analytics from a user experience perspective. So as you move into that mobile dynamic, as I said, these applications need to be hugely architected towards user experience. They need to understand not only what the users are doing, but they need to be able to optimize in the ease of use, and we need to make sure that if something is happening that causes a problem, we're very quickly fixing it. So what we brought out to the market a few years ago is a product called AppPulse. The AppPulse mobile suite is a real user kind of scenario, a monitoring scenario that helps us to instrument mobile applications and track and trace what's happening inside them. So when you start to roll these procedures out, when you start to roll these new application functionalities out into the market, you can start to track what users are doing in the application. So which part of the app did they hit? Which were the most important drop-down menus? Which area of the process flow did they typically follow? But equally, when there's an error, it will capture exactly what's happening within that error. So it will show you what operating system the user is on, where it crashed, what happened, and similarly, if it can get down to it, it will trace it through to the application code as well to say this is the actual part of the application code that causes the problem. So if you think about that whole user experience cycle, you can start to implement the monitoring a lot further left in the delivery life cycle. So we're advocating a shift-left monitoring approach, so you can start to build the understanding of what real users are experiencing. But equally, when your test cases are running, you can start to see what caused the problem as you were driving it. And as you move into the operational domain, it helps you to then build these technologies into your operational monitoring suites to understand how service levels are being managed, but equally get down to the problems and cut down on the mean time to repair of any of those problems as well. So it's based on being able to bring the user much further left in the ideal delivery life cycle, but drive a much more key behavioural pattern of what people are doing. And then I think the last one to kind of focus on Mobile Center is all around really kind of the driving out these performance scans in the cycle. So we shouldn't be thinking as an afterthought, I better check if it's secure and I'll run a security scan. It's that end state penetration testing dynamic. We should absolutely be protecting and scanning the code as we're driving this through the life cycle. So we've got a product, HPE Fortify. It's a security technology. It's been in the market for many, many years. Effectively being able to build this into your Mobile Center dynamic, ensure that developers have scanned the code and done static application dynamic security testing, and then moving into more of a dynamic mode, back to that sort of business use case perspective as we move through the life cycle. So, ensure the code is secure, and then check again for threats as you start to look at the business processes and the business use cases further down the security life cycle. Fully integrated with Mobile Center again, so you can just drive an end-to-end process as you move forward. And then, I had to kind of put this in from an end-to-end perspective because we talked about monitoring as a big part of mobile. Well, equally, as we talked about, when you start to think about the response time perspective of most users, we have to be very, very a key part of the delivery streams we have to understand is that the performance is a massive part of a mobile application. And the performance of a mobile application has some extra dynamics that we probably didn't think about in the past. A lot of the internal apps that we developed, you're plugged into a network, and you're normally on a wireless application network or a LAN somewhere that allows you to use the speed of that WAN or the LAN. When you go onto the mobile dynamic, you have to take into these, the many different network conditions, whether it's 3G, 4G, whether you are on Wi-Fi, etc. So when you think about security testing and you think about how you drive that non-functional dynamic for that, we have to be doing the same thing for the non-functional dynamics for performance. It has to be baked into our life cycle, but you have to be able to test pre-prod for the conditions that we think we're going to see in production. So the scale of the users that are going to access the system, and then equally what the conditions will look like in the architecture as those transactions are running. So we can start to mimic those real user environments, network speeds, service architecture, etc., as we're performing these performance tests. And we've got a couple of tools that are in the suite here that helps. I think most people, if they know HP, will know Load Runner. Kind of a very industry-leading product in terms of the web architectures. And we've also brought out a new tool, which is HP Storm Runner. So Storm Runner is more of a cloud-based capability that you can access and run rather than having a license for an end-to-end license in perpetuality, you can rent those on our SaaS platforms. You can run them on a on a peak scenario, so you don't have to have licenses that are sitting redundant for a year if you're only running 4 peak load tests a year. You can buy a peak load test requirement, and you can scale to millions of virtual users on the platform across a global architecture of load generators that are out there on the cloud to help you to mimic those conditions as you run them. So a hugely powerful tool baked again into Mobile Center to help drive that end-to-end life cycle. And you might be saying, well, okay, great, what do we do next? Well, we offer as a service internally, and if you want to look to know more detail about this, speak to your account teams or send me an email or the Vivid team an email, and we'll help you to get to this. But we run what we call a mobile 360 assessment report. So if there's something you think you'd like to see, if you think, how is your app? Is it good? Is it bad? We can help run a free service just to quickly get you a benchmark to understand all of those things and how your application's running. So if there's something of interest, please let us know, and we'll happily plan to run one of these mobile assessment reports for you, so you can see in reality how your application's running today and if it needs to be optimized. So moving on to the second topic, it's really more around this kind of DevOps lifecycle and the agile world of delivery that we sit in today. So we brought a tool to the market last year called HPE ALM Octane. And ALM Octane was really focused on a modern way of delivering applications. So we've had QC, Enterprise, if everyone's a little bit older than as well, they'll know about Test Director in the early days. So we've moved from Test Director to Quality Center Enterprise. And in about 2009, 2010, we also released a product into the market which was called HPE ALM, which was a superset of the quality lifecycle and focused across the end-to-end chain. And what we've done here is we've brought out a new tool, again, really focused about how do you bring together a modern delivery flow in the way that the systems are working today. And a lot of this is based around pipelines. So if you think about that view there of plan, execute, build, test, track, etc., it's a pipeline. It's a pipeline of delivery that we need to manage and we need to operate. And what we're building into ALM Octane is the ability to manage all that together, singular views, singular dashboards, so we can get an aggregated view of all of the things that are happening in these modern agile delivery streams, but equally, what's next in the flow. So kind of thinking about task management and completeness, equally think about, if there's a financial reporting scenario of how much time was spent on a particular feature release, being able to aggregate all that view back up to a PMO view of the world to give people access from a management reporting perspective, but also a progress perspective across the pipeline. So let's break this down a little bit further and kind of looking at a few of the use cases and the things in those areas. These aren't exhaustive slides. I've only been able to pick one for each area, but it will hopefully give you an understanding about how Octane's looking to support that modern delivery chain. So from a planning perspective, as you would expect, you want to first and foremost be able to look at the workflow for that particular end-to-end pipeline. So you want to be able to create the workflow in the right way. You want to be able to build in the optimized quality gates, if you still want to call them quality gates. But the fact of the matter is at some point in the flow, you want to be able to make sure that things are being checked and validated so that things can be moving forward. And there's a very simple, easy workflow tool to do that. You also want to be able to, as I said, to plan that expected velocity and quality. How fast do we want to go? When's our deadline? What do we want to see from a quality perspective, the KPIs? But you equally then want to start thinking about planning the application release. So how do you create and update a requirements backlog using user stories, modern dynamics? How do you rank the backlog? How do you understand what's prioritized for the business? How do you then drop that down to releases and sprints for teams and the teams that have got a bandwidth to be able to drive the activities and the tasks that are currently in the backlog? And as it says, you want to be able to then assign those items to specific personas, not just teams, but you almost want to be able to allocate tasks to individuals in those sprint teams. And that's really what the planning and the backlog tool is all about, is being able to bring all of that together in a modern interface and be able to, apply those rules and changes back down to the teams that are going to be carrying out the tasks. Something we just brought in recently, so this product is going through a very iterative development life cycle. The last release we did in December, we also brought in the backlog management scenarios. So, a lot of people are using, Kanban boards or, kind of those planning aspects of where those tasks are and what status they are. Very much aligned with Scrum, Kanban, and the kind of safe and scaled agile framework view of the world. Looking at progression from a track, team, individual, process perspective, and you want to be able to not only capture that, but create your own items in that backlog as well in the workflow. So very easy to use interface to build those effectively those individual tasks and those individual activities and see where they are in the status of progressing through that particular sprint and that lifecycle delivery. And this is something that's new in our tools. In the ALM Octane tool. So we had a tool in the market, Agile Manager. We've brought a lot of the features into ALM Octane, and they're all contained here alongside some of the test management and the pipeline management facilities that you'll see in the next slides. This is an ongoing development for us. So as we say, the first use cases are in the system today. This will evolve over time and it'll be more capable and more things coming as we go. So if you want more information specifically about where this product's heading, like I say, contact your account management teams or your pre-sales teams, and I'm sure they'll be willing to give you more data about where this is heading and what's happening. Then you've got to think from a test perspective, how does testing work in a modern agile delivery lifecycle or a delivery ecosystem? Well, we need to bring all that traceability together. We need to see the end-to-end flow of the work. We need to, we don't have the luxury anymore to sit down for maybe a few weeks to plan our test strategy against the requirements. These things are changing regularly. So you need visibility of all the things that are happening to be able to then quickly analyze what testing needs to happen and what quality levels have already been delivered on the different sprints and the features and functions that have been plugged together. And, there's a lot of things here from a testing perspective that, helps get the team visibility. We've had technology in the market for many, many years that help to plug referenceability between source code management, build systems, IDEs, etc., into the tool chain. And that's all the same within ALM Octane. So effectively, when you're driving this level of continuous delivery, there has to be a testing aligned to it, and we have to start thinking very clearly about what happens in those agile sprints to ensure the testing is done on the sprint level. But then also, if you're in a kind of agile delivery pattern, when you get into an ITIL change release management cycle, we need to start thinking about how do we bring all that integrated state of change together, and what does the user experience look like across the entire piece. And then from a release perspective, and something else that with this tool that's very different from the past, is we use plugins to the continuous integration cycle. So effectively, the pipelines are managed via the CI pipeline build tools. So plug into Jenkins, for example. In effect, what we're doing here is to be able to reference back to all the change that's happening right at the front of the delivery lifecycle, all the way through to the end of the lifecycle, and say, well, what was the status of that build? What happened? What ran? Did any of the tests fail as a result? And effectively give visibility back to that continuous integration cycle, back to the teams that are in the working on these, to say what needs to change and what needs to happen. And as many customers I've worked with over the years, what they see when they start viewing this type of information is that rather than the teams doing their tasks in the delivery cycles, they all start to work together to fix the bottlenecks in the pipeline. So if something's stuck, it might be, well, hold on a minute, why is my build 45 stuck in the pipeline? What do I need to do? Let me go back and talk to the development team if I'm a tester. If the development team sees that it's stuck in the testing phase, they might go and talk to the testing team and say, well, hold on a second, what's going on, guys? Are you using the right configuration state? Are you using this build that I put together, etc.? So you start to get a lot more collaboration. You start to get more people focused on what's important, which is working software at the end of the delivery lifecycle. And then the last piece, just to kind of focus on ALM Octane, is bringing and aggregating all this back together. So as we said at the start, there has to be a very powerful tracking and dashboard technology. And you have to cascade the dashboard to the relevant personas that are involved in the delivery flow. You might want to have more of a KPI dashboard for your management team that see status of progress, quality, etc. But you also might need to aggregate that down to the teams working on the sprints of what they want to see as well. So be able to drive the right level of content to the right team. And then on top of that, we've got to start thinking about analytics and that DevOps cycle. Because as we all know, no matter what we do, the flow of the work in the system is never going to be perfectly optimized. And we always need to keep a view of what's happening. And DevOps is a lot about continuous integration and continuous improvement cycles, So when we look at that overall flow from a dashboard perspective, can we start to provide DevOps and analytical views that help people to get to the data and information more quickly to make business decisions or IT decisions on what needs to happen next? Which is a perfect segue to the next piece. And I have to put this up because this is roadmap type of information. It's something we're working on in the labs. And effectively, this is, as it says, it's a 3-year rolling roadmap. There's no dates in this presentation, but some of the things we're working on, they may change, but this is the kind of dynamics and the things that we're looking at today. So I wanted to just kind of quickly introduce the Predictive ALM Framework and what we're planning to do. First and foremost, be able to supply that, like I said, the data and the analytics to different teams or different capabilities or steps within the delivery lifecycle. We've broken it up into 4 main areas, not because there's different teams that fit, but just because we were writing the algorithms focused around helping people to plan better, develop better, test better, and operate better. And as you can see here, when we look at the predictive framework, this focused around some key use cases and key dynamics. And when we release this technology, there'll be an analytical algorithms that are supplied that we've been working on in our labs for many months. And we're confident they're working in our labs, but when we bring them into our customer environments, we need to optimize those for the customer environments. So it's not as simple as install a product and all of it goes away. There needs to be some view that when you're bringing in analytics, it's a starting point. They are going to improve over time, and then obviously you can write additional algorithms and things to see what's happening based on your own use cases as well. But these are the kind of dynamics we're building to, and then just a couple of kind of scenarios to paint those out here, and the 3 different dynamics. I'll quickly talk through these. The one on the left-hand side in terms of defect convergence. Really looking at, when do we predict that all of the defects will be closed in the project? So, we've seen a number of defects raised. We're working on them. When are we confident that we can release based on all those defects that we've got? If we wanted a level of defect remediation to go into the cycle. And you can leave it flat and say, how long will it take me? And it will give you an end date of the project. But if you had a project delivery date, you could put that in and say, I've got to hit March the 30th. What does this mean if I've got to hit to March the 30th in terms of how many resources do I need to plan for? How many people, where do I see the biggest areas of risk, etc. So you can start to say, based on that delivery date, what's my confidence that we're going to get to the quality levels that we need to be able to deliver against? And you can start to use that to plan. In the middle, you can see the defect convergence scenarios in terms of testing production. And really this is about what test cases am I running, what are the real users doing, and what is the overlap of those 2 worlds. And if I'm running test cases that the real users aren't running themselves, are we just doing a lot of testing that's redundant? And equally, if the real users are doing things that we're not testing against, shouldn't we be adding test cases against those? So you can start to bring that production and testing world and then converge the two together to get a better coverage analysis of what's happening. And then on the last one, the root cause analysis cycles. So be able to link into production monitoring tools, service management tools to bring that level of information back into the root cause analysis function and start to run and test run analysis kind of dynamics. So, what happens with those environments, the configurations? Are we going to break the builds? Are we going to do this, et cetera, and be able to bring that much more front and center into our planning and understanding of real user experience as a result. So, I know there's a lot of information there. I'll just leave you with this final slide. If you want to know where to go to find more information about ALM Octane, that's the link there from our SaaS portal, and you'll also be able to get a trial version of the software on that SaaS portal. Okay, so that was all I had. I'm going to bring Stefan back into the conversation, and we're going to answer some questions.
Brilliant, Toby. Thank you ever so much. That was really interesting. I hope everybody else found it so. We have a number of questions. So if we go straight into the questions, if I could ask people just to, we'll stop asking questions at about 11:57, or in about 5 minutes' time, so that I can just cover off the last few slides and then finish off any other questions that might be going on. Are you all right with that, Toby?
Absolutely, sure.
Lovely. Okay, so let's ask the first question. Is Mobile Center available as a software as a service model?
That's a good question. So currently Mobile Center is only an on-premise license model. So we've specifically built it because we had a lot of feedback from the customers that they wanted to bring it into their overall testing architecture and frameworks. There is some ongoing work within product management to bring out a cloud kind of version of the software, and there's more news to come of that particular use case as that advances. But if you are looking for to run this as a service rather than buy the perpetual licenses, etc., we are also delivering it as a service offering via our professional services team. So there's a fully defined service offering there, and there's a number of partners that we work with as well that are also doing the same in the market. So there's always options to run it as a service. There's new things coming on the roadmap that will address that sort of cloud architecture view. And if you are interested today, then we can always, like you say, run it into a service offering or one of our partners as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so next question. Can you elaborate on how ALM Octane works in an agile project environment?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think you have, when you get into the agile world, Stefan, and I know you're an agile leader in your own space, I think you have to think slightly differently in terms of the way that's working. And we've got a lot of customers out there that are using, already doing an agile delivery path. They are using existing tools. So there's a couple of different scenarios, really. One, Octane's obviously fully aligned, and we're a gold standard partner with the SAFe environment. So Scaled Agile Framework for the enterprise, where we can manage that task kind of throughput to a project level, to a program level in terms of integrating that all together. And we do that through, Octane, ALM, PPM, different tools. And we can bring that enterprise alignment so we can let the teams run in the agile sprint patterns and the project cycles, but we can also aggregate that data back up to a governance kind of dashboard if the PMO wanted to see it, change dashboard, etc. But the other thing that to be very, very clear about in this world is, you can't control the architecture everywhere. There's going to be different teams running their own tools, etc. So we've built a very clear integration strategy within ALM Octane, where we want to, it's an open API architecture, so you can basically plug tools into it. Very, very simply. So if you're using Jira, for example, in one of your delivery paths, that becomes just integrated into the workflow and we can see what's happening. And that's really the build process of ALM Octane. Is we're trying to be agile ourselves and open to how this works within a lot of customers' ecosystems. Really to the point of, not locking down our environments anymore, but being much more integrated and open. So whatever needs to be tracked needs to be put into the tools. And I think that's what I've seen most customers struggle with, is when they've gone agile. It's not that it hasn't worked, it's now they're losing the visibility and the understanding of the change and what's happening at more of a corporate level of managing those life cycles. So, integration, key point, and then obviously that build into the enterprise scaled agile framework view of the world would be how Octane works in that environment.
Yeah, totally. I definitely concur with that. In that lots of organisations can run agile in smaller teams, but when you try and scale it up to be an enterprise-wide solution, that's often where communication becomes harder. And clearly, there's some interesting offerings here through ALM Octane. Excellent. What I'd like to do, as we've got 3 minutes left, is just go through the next couple of slides and then come back to, there's one more question left over. Are you all right with that, Toby?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, just a quick reminder that we've got some further sessions over the next 2 days in the ADM stream. We've got Agile Delivery in a continuously regulated environment, so that's carrying on a little bit of this conversation that we've been talking about Octane and taking it a lot further. Enabling the shift towards Agile and DevOps and supporting the idea economy. So I totally recommend people sign up to those. In our ITOM stream, we have 4 further sessions over the next couple of days. Please look and join, and we'd really appreciate your participation in them. What I'd like to add is that on the 16th to the 19th of May, we have an EMEA Software Customer Forum for 2017 in Dublin. Details to follow. There is a download that will be made available shortly. And if you download that and complete the registration information on there, that will be great. Let me just go on to the next slide here. There will be a survey at the end of this. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Anything we can do to improve and make things work even more smoothly would be greatly appreciated. That's the end of my slides. Toby, are you okay to answer the last question?
Absolutely, sure.
Perfect. So the last question we have is, we have many projects working towards a DevOps capability. How do you support the necessary culture change needed to get there? A nice easy one to finish with.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a half an hour response, but I'll keep it brief. I think when you think about cultural change, and this has been top of my mind because obviously driving the DevOps dynamic, there is absolutely fundamental change that needs to happen. We need to reevaluate what we do. So first point of change is manage it well. So, and when I say manage it well, you've got to prove value of the change. So whatever changes you implement, you have to very quickly prove the value. But equally, when you do a change, the big dynamic of managing change and driving change is visibility in my mind, and using and standardizing what is important to the different teams, because this is breaking down communities that have been in IT for years. So I think one of the big things that we're trying to do is use the data, the visibility, the dashboards, the KPIs to help to police and manage that change. Not because we want people, to impart bureaucracy and governance on top of the teams, but by focusing on the right KPIs, by tracking and understanding what's happening in the pipeline, we can start to change people's hearts and minds and start to focus them on the right conditions. So I think that's the big silver kind of bullet, if you like, in terms of where we're heading to help drive that cultural change. But obviously you need to operationalize it much deeper at the task levels and the process levels of each individual community that's in the stream. But that would be the easiest way and the short answer.
Toby, thank you very much. We've had no further questions come through. So Toby, just remains for me to say thank you ever so much. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for your effort, and thank you for everybody for attending. A final reminder just to have a look at the download that's available about the Software Customer Conference, and also your feedback on the surveys. And just remains for me to say thank you very much, everybody.